So, welcome everybody to the live oracle, and this edition is going to be speaking about opening the door to shadow. So, those of you that have been on the journey with me from the very start know that we've been looking at things like mind, body, soul, the breath, how we connect more to the soul, and how we kind of come into feelings. And this episode, I felt really important to look at opening into the shadow. There are lots of things I want to cover in these calls, but the shadow is something that is really kind of being used and bandied around in the spiritual community a lot of late, and something that's not really that well kind of I keep saying the word kind of, but it's kind of not really embodied. Shadow work is a really deep aspect of spiritual work, because when we're looking at the spiritual, we're looking at the whole being in somebody, and that includes the mind, it includes the body, it includes the spirit, it includes the soul. And the shadow aspect of us is half of us are shadow and half of us are light, half of us are masculine, half of us are feminine. We are set up that we are in the dual, in the opposites. We are living in duality, and we are seeking unity. That's what we're seeking. And so, to come back to a unified field, we need to make sure that we are addressing both sides, always the opposites. And my fascination with Jung and his work, and my own journey through the Jungian psychology, has made it very aware that there are two sides to me as a person in the aspects I've just shared, but most importantly, within the shadow. Now, the shadow has been called the shadow, coined that term by Jung, but before that, it was called what the alchemists would call nigrido. And nigrido is the blackening. It has been said by the earlier mystics and the prophets that there was such a thing as the dark night of the soul, a dissolving of illusions. So it's marked in many, many sacred texts and many prophecies and bodies of work that there's a space that we as humans on a journey through life, especially a spiritual journey, come upon this thing that I call the shadow. And the shadow is the parts of us that we have repressed, that we've hidden, that we've denied, that we've put away and refused to believe that we are, because we hold a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, and society says that's not okay. So when that enters into the psyche, we refute it, we deny it, because it's not a good thing. And who wants to be shadowy? Who wants to be bad? Who wants to have darkness? Of course, we're all striving to attain lightness and goodness. And everything the shadow, brings up for us is what we don't want. And that's why it's difficult work, even with people that are really wanting to venture there, because the ego will get in the way and it will prevent us really seeing ourselves as we are. And this is the thing that always kind of makes me, smile when I do any shadow work with people, is the fact that everybody else is seeing it anyway. And it's just us that isn't. And I find that, quite humorous. I know on my own journey, I found that devastating too, that people were aware of the shadow aspects of me, my behaviors that I was hiding from myself. And so it's always within our understanding that people might have said things to us in the past that are highlighting our shadow behavior that we absolutely denied or refused to accept. And somewhere along the line later on a spiritual path, it always comes back. Somebody always reminds us that that attribute still lies within us. And so I want to just talk about this in different stages, really, because it's a really big topic. And it's a topic that has, for me, made my spiritual work very deep, very enlightening, very opening, and very transformative. But I also see that there's so much kind of misunderstanding of the shadow out there, and that people see this as a surface kind of work that they do that isn't really what shadow work is. So, for example, just by saying I have a shadow and these are some of my bad behaviors is not really doing the shadow work. The depth of shadow work is done with another person. So I do this with my analyst or within a group situation, within my Jungian groups, for example, my Druid groups. We look at the shadow, and it's often brought to our attention by others because it's really hard to get to by the self. So I want to start with that first. It's usually others that point out our shadows to us. And when they do, we will absolutely deny it. When we're working in a kind of, clinical setting or a therapy setting or a coaching session, it still may hit us really hard. And the first thing that we notice when we touch shadow is that there will be a trigger. It will overtake us, and it will make us feel a certain way, overwhelmed, completely angry, deeply defensive. And that's the first thing when we're coming into shadow work, to understand that a trigger is often something that is pointing to the shadow within you that wants to be set free. So when I work with people within the realms of shadow work, I understand that there are some places that I will need to trigger, or there will be things that I say that unintentionally trigger the other. So I want you to just feel for a moment by taking a really big deep breath and coming into the sacred space that we always come into within the framework of sacred work, of spiritual work. And that's a space that is quiet, free from disturbance. Maybe you've lit a candle and you're in some kind of sacred space. And by closing your eyes, you're already beginning to understand that we're taking a journey inward into the body. And that your breath is the passageway to go deeper and to be more connected. So we use the breath to bridge the mind. We bridge that to the body, feeling our feet and feeling our legs, the hips, the abdominal, heart, and shoulders, and all the arms, and the head. And just be breathing into your body. I want you to just breathe into the body. Feeling the breath taking you deeper, deeper, bridging the mind to the body so the mind becomes a lot quieter. And then it brings you deeply into the body. You're feeling the whole body enlivened with the breath and with the white light. And so breathe in the white light, bring the white light into the body. And feel that white light really fill you up, really take from the white light. Feel the white light connecting you to the divine. Feel the white light bringing you into this sphere of beautiful, luminescent, holy light. And just purify your whole field with that. Purify all the aura around you, inside of you. Just feel that white light really beginning to work through you. And then begin to send that white light outside of the body. Begin to feel it creating a circle of energy all around you. And now feel that white light holding you in a really sacred, safe space. And within this space, I want you to just feel your whole psyche as light and dark. I want you to be able to feel the repressed parts of you, the parts of you that you are shameful of, the parts of you that you have hidden because society does not accept them, parts of you that your upbringing said was not acceptable, parts of you that has been condemned. Just begin to feel that shadow side of the self. And just feel the light side of yourself in balance too, that you hold shadow and light. And that the light is made greater when we begin to work within the shadow. And just hold that reflection within this meditation. I am light, I am shadow, I am good, I am bad, and I am human. So as you come back into your conscious world by opening your eyes, and looking around you, just feel that space where you are completely and utterly human, in that you have good attributes and you have negative attributes. You have repressed parts and parts that are illuminated to yourself. Sometimes life drops us into our shadow self. Sometimes situations arise within our lives to try to show us our shadow. And these are the times where there is suffering involved. We hate to suffer as humans. We do everything we can to escape suffering, with the little understanding that when we are not conscious of our behaviors, that they do entice suffering itself. So we need to look at the fact that the repressed shadow, the shadow that we're not conscious of, creates suffering in our world and in our life. And we might be aware of that. For example, right now, there may be something going on in your life that is causing you suffering. And there will be shadow connected to that. There will be parts of it that need to be illuminated, that can help change the situation you're in. And this can be the hardest place to break through, in understanding that when we're dealing with the shadow self and suffering, that we want to defend that. We want to reject responsibility for situations or for difficulties in our lives. And we'd much sooner blame somebody else. So, for example, there's always this part in our world, as we can see outside now with the war, where there's one blaming another and another blaming the other. And in fact, if both sides looked at their own shadows, they would realize that the war was happening with each other's shadow. They were fighting each other's shadow. And the work was to be done is to be done with the own self, the own shadow, not the others. You cannot war against somebody else's shadow. It does not work. You are doing an internal boxing match outside of yourself. So it's very normal that we will defend. Oh no, that's not me, it's them. We will blame. We will also avoid. And we will say words like, oh, it's not me. Oh, I'm not dishonest. Well, I'm not a liar. Well, it's not because of him. Well, it's not because whenever we use the word it is not, and Freud discovered this, it means we are. And I've really tried to work on that when I say, well, it's not my relationship, because I realize that statement in itself is a defense. And whenever I begin to say it is not because I don't want to, then I know it is. And that leaves me to open and question and see where my shadow is in that I'm saying it is not. Another way to know that the shadow is involved is that when we're in repeated cycles, that the same thing's coming up over and over and over again, that we're in loops, that behaviors are constantly coming back to us. People may be pointing this out to us, like, you're always angry, or you're always avoiding going to yoga, or you're always being, like argumentative. And when we keep hearing these things over and over again, it's really trying to show us parts of our shadow that wants to come up, and for me to say, yeah, I'm avoiding my yoga class because I'm lazy. I'm avoiding my yoga class because I don't want to feel those feelings. And it's really difficult to come into admittance. And we'll all recognize that when we say it is not, when we blame another, when we defend something. I know for me, when there's a trigger and it's trying to highlight something that's my shadow, I will become quite angered by that. I will become quite hot. There will be a heat that rises in me. And I want you to just be aware of your own somatic response when you're being triggered, when shadow is being pointed out. How do you react? What does your body do? How does it make you feel? What's your response? Do you want to run away or challenge that person or shrink into nothing? And this was a key teaching for me, to be able to understand that I knew my somatic response to a trigger that was hiding shadow behavior in me. How do I respond? Does the heart quicken? My heart quickens. I become very fighty, a bit shaky, very defensive. So I want you to, write those things down. Write down, what is your somatic response when trying to put a bright light on that shadow comes up? And just think about that for a moment. And of course, those that are doing this as a recording, you can pause and just take some time to reflect on that and write down those somatic responses. So we get over hurdle number one. Hurdle number one is not defending, not blaming, not projecting it outward, not avoiding, not saying, oh, it's not, but trying to take it in and feeling it, feeling that somatic response, feeling what's being said to you without any of those responses as mentioned. And if we get over that, if we can say, okay, yeah, I'm lazy, I'm avoiding yoga because I'm lazy, we can't get there easily because we don't like to suffer. And admitting a shadow behavior causes me to suffer. So the fact I'm not going to yoga class isn't because the weather's not great, or because, I can't find the money, or because I can't, whatever excuse I'm giving it. It's because I don't like going because it makes me feel something. And I might not have admitted that to myself until that very point. I broke through initiation one of not denying. And then initiation two asks me to say, oh gosh, yeah, I do that. And I need to investigate why. And as soon as we do that, it brings up truth. It makes us address in ourselves what we don't want to see. It makes us suffer. It makes us not feel nice. And Lord knows, in this dopamine-fueled world, all we want to do is feel nice. And in that dopamine chasing, scrolling through the internet, taking a drink of alcohol, taking drugs, whatever it is that you're trying to do to escape, what we're escaping is our suffering. To really take on, my behavior isn't right. No, I can't hide away in the house forever, or can't avoid going to yoga class because it's actually going to make me feel a lot better, even though I might feel worse to begin with. It's about addressing what we don't want to see. It's about feeling what we don't want to feel. And I want to do another recording on feelings because this is another huge topic that's really important. Feeling what you feel. Now, at this point in this nigrido, as the alchemist would call it, and Jung himself reckoned the shadow work to the blackening, that when we come into kind of an ownership, that we begin to blacken into the shadow. We begin to feel the suffering, we begin to feel the behavior, we begin to feel why. And if we can allow this, this is the beginning of transformation. This is when transformation starts. And this is a process. And so the process begins now. The feeling, the linking that behavior to maybe the past and your childhood and when you started to do that and why you've done that. And this can be really uncomfortable. It can be really jarring for the psyche. It can be really upsetting. And the process has got to go naturally. It's got to take its time, because what the ego will do is try to bring you out of it. It will try to constantly say, okay, yeah, you might not go to yoga and you're not facing, but you are doing that in a different way. It will make excuses again. It will try to wiggle its way out so you don't own it to the full depth that you need to own it. And that's something you need to be aware of. And my analyst said to me, be in this process. Don't try to come out of it too quickly. And I'm terrible for that. Like, as much as I'm willing to go there is a part of me that wants a resolution very quickly. So I'm in the suffering and I've admitted that my behavior's been really bad and it's been causing me problems in my relationships and da da da. And then I'm like, okay, how do I fix this? And I want to resolve it as soon as I begin to feel it. Only if I don't feel that into the depths that it needs to be felt, I'm actually going to dip my toes in, take a little bite into the shadow, and come back out and not heal it and not resolve it. So I've got to make sure I'm in a process of feeling. And what happens is that feeling takes us down into a depth, and then it will begin to release us in its own time. And there's a real kind of art to doing this. I'm not saying I've mastered it because I really haven't, because I'm always in this space where I'm feeling I'm deep in this suffering and it's really painful and I'm looking for ways out. And then there's an awareness that I don't want to sit around in it for a week. But there's no time that we can put on this, because when we've gone into the suffering, when we've gone into the feeling, when we've gone into the emotion and it's releasing and unreleasing and releasing, we will feel and begin to learn a natural loosening, a natural coming up out of. But that's not me grasping to fix it, to end it, to stop it. And I'm trying to share this from an embodied place and what I've learned. And if you're new to shadow work, you won't know what I'm talking about. But when you start to go there, you will understand these seeds that I've implanted in. And you will begin to see exactly it when you're trying to scramble out, when you're trying to bypass, when you're trying to resolve it sooner than the process of feeling is needed. So I'm just going to stop there and just allow you some self-reflection. Think about a time when you've been suffering, where maybe you've not admitted it was down to your shadow and your shadow behaviors. Maybe you've blamed somebody else or denied it. Have a little feel into how you bypassed it. know your bypassing ways. Because if you know your own bypassing ways, maybe you go and smoke a joint, maybe you drink a bottle of wine, maybe you go flick on the social media, maybe you go out running or shopping to satisfy that place that doesn't want to suffer. So know how you escape suffering. And then ask yourself, do you feel that these places are in a completion cycle for you? Are you able to complete a cycle? So I've just been really recently through a really big shadow piece, and this has been happening with the women that I've been working with within my gatekeepers of the womb. We're in a deep part of the womb where a lot of shadow is coming up, and when we're in a vacuum with other people, it's often much more transformative. And I've been going through it, and the women in the group have been going through it, and we're being very carefully going through it without coming out too soon, without bypassing. And I want to highlight this word because it's really kind of like a deep rot in the spiritual world, and that is spiritual bypassing. That word means that we try to transcend our suffering, that we try to numb the pain through different methods of, okay, let's have a positive affirmation, or let's ignore the pain and pretend we're light beings. Let's say, oh, okay, we're dark, like, okay, that's happening, but I'm going to transcend the dark. And we don't actually go to the dark. We ignore pain. We ignore the things that keep coming to us. We keep blaming. That's a spiritual bypass to blame. And then to believe that there are kind of like codes or downloads or like an hour chakra cleansing that can heal your foundational wound, or an emotion code that can stop your poverty. These are deep, deep soul lessons. These are deep journeys into the psyche that take this whole process that I'm sharing. They are not magic wand fixables. And many people, and I have been included in this, have spent many years bypassing that deep suffering, going through the cycle of healing properly and bypassing those wounds. I've bypassed wounds with mantras, with drumming circles, with everything that's avoided me from feeling. I've blamed other people, oh, it's her, she makes me feel this way. No, I'm feeling that way. This person is only triggering something within me that needs healing. And we forget this over and over again because we're humans and we constantly have to remind ourselves. So the question here is, what ways are you spiritually bypassing? What ways do you use spirituality to avoid the suffering? And just think on that for a moment. Something may come forward straight away, but the deeper ones come from the unconscious. It's the ones that you're not aware of. And what you're trying to do in this moment is try to pull them from the unconscious to bring them forward. Yeah, I've been doing all of that kind of, stuff that, and this has been hard for me to admit because I have been in this field of work for many, many years, and I have used probably every single thing. I have used tarot to say, oh, is this relationship going to end or start? And then the tarot card's gone, oh, yeah, it's all going to be great. Or the tarot's told me it's going to crash and burn. And I've gone, oh, that's not true. I've just used everything, every single method to avoid suffering until I became conscious that that was not transforming me. So the same again, if this is being listened to as a recording, write those down. Make yourself aware of your spiritual bypassing ways, because we all hold them. And I want you to stay with the eyes closed a minute while I just kind of bring forward what the shadow shows, what the shadow does, what it reveals. And I want you to just feel these words. Dependency. Vulnerability. Admittance. Shock. Hurt. Pain. Suffering. Trauma. Wounds. Shame. Guilt. Fear. Grief. Ego. Defense. Denial. Unacceptance. Humbling. Unworthiness. Belittling. Powerlessness. Projection. Feeling. Emotions. And the inward reflecting the outward, and the outward reflecting the inward. And then with those words collecting in your psyche, seeding in your psyche, just again come into this space in the room around you. And just feeling all this new knowledge, all this knowledge of the shadow, and maybe a little deeper understanding of what that is. When we go through the suffering, when we allow the suffering to leave us, and we begin to know when it's leaving us, it asks us then to take action. And this is the final stage of the shadow cycle. We take action against that has been revealed to us. I go to the yoga class and I realize that I've been avoiding the yoga class because I don't like feeling what it makes me feel. I'd sooner avoid that. And then the action I take is to continue to go to that class and continue to feel. And the reason I don't like feeling, I know, is because when I was a small child, I knew what those feelings were like, and that deep grief that made me feel so depressed. And I go all the way into that feeling and that trigger that started just as someone saying, well, you really avoid going yoga. And I have worked into it deeply to admit that that was the truth and the reasons why. And I begin to take action against that. And I begin to take action against all the other things that I avoid because they make me feel. And I realize that I'm not fixed and healed in this place forever. I've not transcended from my shadow into my light body, but I have cast light upon behavior. And now I won't avoid things that lead me into feeling. And then that means that I get to experience not only suffering, but great joy too. Because I'm remembering that the polarity exists, the shadow reminds me that whatever I experience in one place, I experience at the height in the opposite. So more joy comes in, and I love going to those yoga classes, and it feels like it's freed me up, and my body's lighter and my mind's lighter, and I'm not repressing now those feelings that has been leaking into other parts of my life that I've been avoiding watching TV or scrolling on the internet. I realized that it was linked to so many things. And that's the beauty of shadow work. When we begin to unpick one thing, we begin to take the action and we see that it unpicks many things and that it transforms us. It changes our behavior, and then the outside world changes around us, and we become a little bit addicted to that. I am definitely addicted to shadow work in the way that I can become more powerful in my own psyche and understanding that I am not a victim of my life, but I am the creator of it. And that anything that I am unhappy with in my life is down to me. And to stay in the victimhood means that I stay in that situation. But to enter in the shadow and become the hero of my own shadow, which many of the myths show us, fight the shadow creature, and the hero's journey is done. And I become a hero all the time in my own story of changing my relationship, my work, my job, my lifestyle, all of it. And that's the beauty of shadow work. And that's what I really wanted to drop into this call tonight. Refusal to face the shadow creates this hub, a hub of illusion, delusion, suffering, war, an internal war, an external war, loops, patterns, difficulties in your life, an unhappy life, stuckness, discord, stress, anxiety, depression. It's all a refusal to face the shadow. So take a big deep breath again and just settle into that new knowledge again. And just imagine the world outside this circle. And any areas in your life currently that you're really unhappy with. And to try to begin to navigate were your shadows lurking in that situation? Where can you take ownership that it's you and your behaviours? Your unwillingness to give things up or to see them as they are? What part of you is really in denial, in blame, in projection, or complete and utter refusal to feel how much you are really suffering in an attempt to stay afloat in your suffering? And stay with that. Stay with that now and after this transmission, this psycho journey into yourself, questioning, so that you can begin to transform whatever it is that needs transforming. That you are the alchemist in the Negredo. That you can enter into a dark place and leave back out into the light. That the dark night of the soul finally becomes the light of day. And I want to leave you there with it, with this thing that you can transform by facing the shadow, looking it directly into its deep, dark eyes and telling it, you are not hiding from it anymore. You are no longer running away from it, but you will deal with it and feel with it and heal with it. May you all see the shadow as a deep passageway and path to the light. Blessings to you all with much love.